Hello, I'm here looking at the roller coaster in the Left4Dead 2 campaign Dark Carnival. This was a request from tf2maps.net user Catfish, who requested I look at this after I looked at the one in Laughter, the TF2 map. Overall, this one's a step up because it's actually physically possible, although this roller coaster would be extremely painful to ride. So I'm gonna kind of gloss over the station because it's a fairly standard line and station setup that's fairly realistic. And we're just gonna jump directly into the actual coaster. So up first, this is what would be the first lift hill. There's no visual indications that it's a lift hill, but it's pretty clear it's supposed to be. Then we go into a fairly standard turnaround for a wooden roller coaster, for older wooden roller coasters. But then the first drop is absolutely ridiculous. This is what's known as a double down, where you go down twice before going back up, so there's some sort of flat or less steep section in the center. On wooden roller coasters, it's very uncommon for the first drop to be a double down. In fact, I don't know of any roller coasters in which that's actually the case. And also, this is way too steep for a wooden roller coaster of this size. This would be exceptionally painful because the transitions between the slopes and flats are very, very, very tight. Right here, you would get very high positive g-forces, which means you would get crushed in your seat. And then immediately you have very high negative g-forces, meaning you would get thrown against your restraints so hard that it would be painful. And then you do it again with getting crushed at the bottom. If this was smoothed out into one slope, this would maybe be a fine drop, if a bit steep. But as it stands, there's a good chance it would seriously harm anybody who actually rode this roller coaster. Then there's this weird flat section before the first hill. It's very unclear to me if this is actually a block break section or just a weird flat spot that could act as the transfer track, because there's nowhere else for the transfer track to go on the entire ride, and this is a weird building in the center. I'll explain those things in a moment. But as it stands, when you actually play this level, you have to hit the button here to start the roller coaster, and then the train comes out here, and then you follow it. Which leads me to believe that this is some sort of mechanism to stop the train in here, which I don't know why you would ever do that right after the first drop. The two things it could be are block breaks, which block breaks are a mechanism used on roller coasters for safety to ensure that different roller coaster trains cannot hit each other. Each roller coaster is split into multiple block sections, they're called, and there can only be one train in each section at all times, otherwise the brakes at the end of that section, of the section before it, turn on to stop trains from hitting each other. The YouTube channel Technology Connections has a great video on block break sections if you're curious about roller coasters, so I'd check that out. But essentially, because there's a control panel here and because this is where you enter it, it seems reasonable that this would be a block break section, but you'd never ever put one at the bottom of a hill because it's designed to, at the bottom of like the first drop, because they're designed to stop the train in an emergency, and at the bottom of the first hill is the hardest place to stop a train in an emergency. The other option is this is some sort of transfer track, so this is where you'd stop the train and then like transfer it, slide the track over into this building, and then this would be like the maintenance area. But there's no track on the outside on this side to like slide in to replace it, and also, again, why would you do that at the bottom of the first drop? So it really feels like chain lift, first drop, brakes, and then second chain lift, which is just not good design. That's running under the assumption this is a chain lift and that is another stopping point. Regardless, we go through that, we get to this hill. This hill is in fact lower than the drop over here, so this is fairly reasonable and realistic. This turnaround is reasonable to be flat because you'd be going slow at this point, so the lateral g-forces, which means side-to-side g-forces, wouldn't be too terribly strong, so a lot of wooden roller coasters, their turnarounds up on the tops of hills are pretty flat, so that's fine. This drop is, again, too sharp of transitions, but then it's immediately into completely unbanked turns that would be painful at higher speeds. Then another ridiculous drop, and then another completely unbanked turn at an even higher speed because we've gone down twice now. This is unreasonable, painful, and probably would injure someone. In addition, there's no railings on the side of this, so maintenance on this section of the coaster would be almost impossible. So wooden roller coasters, every time a park opens in the morning, generally, there is a group of engineers that walk the entire length of the track inspecting it to make sure it's safe. Not having any rails on this section would make that inspection significantly harder to do because there would be nowhere to actually hook onto to remain safe, and there's nothing stopping you from falling. There's a weird flat bit here. There's a lot of weird flat bits around the coaster that just aren't realistic in any way. This being a much more gradual curve would make a lot more sense, but yeah, just flat bits aren't fun on wooden roller coasters, so there's not many of them except for block break sections. This flat section here is fine. This seems like it would be a block break section because it's about halfway through the ride if they are running multiple trains. This is small enough that I don't think they really would. They'd probably only be running two. One would sit in the station load, and then the other one would sit on this other block break section we'll get to later. So I'm not sure you'd really need it, but this being flat is fine. I would, if this was a real roller coaster, this would probably be further over and be using these supports as support rather than having its whole own separate structure, because it's a lot cheaper to just build onto the existing stuff for support than build a whole second structure. This straight stretch is probably the most realistic part of the coaster. There's a drop. The transitions are a bit too steep again, but this is much more reasonable. If you smooth this out, it would be a pretty deep, fun drop. Then we go into a couple little Airtime Hills. This one would realistically be just a bit bigger, and then that one is probably fine. So these are Airtime Hills. These are what are sometimes referred to as bunny hops, where you kind of go up and then down, and then up and then down. Just get a nice little pop of airtime. This is fairly realistic for a wooden roller coaster of this type, because generally when you're running out of speed near the end and there's not many turns left, you just kind of do a couple little bunny hops. This is some nice reuse of structure. Stuff like this would probably work over there as well. Some little bunny hops up into this last turnaround, so this is fairly realistic. We got a nice turnaround at the end in a tunnel. This realistically would be banked because you've got a decent amount of speed at this point, I would assume, but tunnels are fairly common on wooden roller coasters. Not hugely common, but it's not unheard of, so this is like this back turnaround being in a tunnel. It's fine. You come down here, and then this would be another block break section to grab the train and stop it before it hits the one that's already in the station. So realistically, you'd have one train here loading while one train's full that just pulls into the station, stops here, waits for the train to load, that one leaves the station, and then this one pulls in and everybody gets out while the other car does track. So that's pretty realistic. This entrance isn't, because why would you have a sign here that you can only see for a brief second, only on this part, only right here coming out of the tunnel at the end of the ride, or this turnaround up here, because you cannot see the sign from anywhere else in the park except maybe the Ferris wheel, but I don't know where that physically is in relation to this, but yeah. This is the coaster from Left 4 Dead 2. It would be painful. The transitions are too sharp. This double down is insane. These corners would be painful. But overall, it would be possible, just not very fun.